When you talk about new levers at the end or suggest there might be new levers for intervention or prevention, do you have something in mind, or do you think they will emerge from this conference?
Thank you, Kathy. So I believe that we need to harvest what is learned, what has been learned from previous interventions that flow from previous catastrophes. There's a very significant corpus of scholarly research, some of it present in this room and in Zoom, on understanding the pathways to recovery for children facing extreme circumstances, situaciones límite. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel entirely. I believe that there is research from previous scholarship that could be pertinent, that if not structurally identical, at least it's isomorphically opportune to dissect and learn previous practices. I think here of the work of former colleagues of Dr. Ja, Thérèse Betancourt. There is an entire corpus of scholarship, the work of Hiroshi Yoshikawa at NYU, and so many others, part of the research funded by the W.T. Grant Foundation, whose president will be joining us momentarily, suggests that there are important levers and vehicles. I also believe that contemporaneously, we're facing, as the Monsignor Marcelo noted, 3 pandemics here that are in a very malignant synergies. And that is the nexus between the pandemic itself, COVID-19, the domain of climate change and the catastrophic emergencies that we see unfolding the world over, and of course the patterns of increased inequality, a topic that Jim and Kathy have devoted a great deal of their thinking to examine. What I submit to you is that one of the concerns that are new is that children and youth come eventually, Kathy, you know this, to understand the mortality of their own parents, to understand their own mortality. What is cognitively perhaps unprecedented is the notion of a planetary death. I don't think there is an architecture to process for young people and adults the notion that everything, the entire planetary biomass may be at risk. And I think so much of the concerns of the despair, the malaise that we're seeing on issues relating to self-harm, suicidality, and other such domains, perhaps flow from this moment where the planetary life in and of itself becomes an issue of concern for young people. And emerging research is suggesting these are thoughts that live inside the consciousness of so many young people.
Okay, I want to say something. I want to say 2 things, ask you. The first one is what this explosion of the problem that comes from the COVID in the education. I think there are something previous situation chaotic, no? That the COVID made this. This is one thing. And the second is, what could be the positive? We can consider some positive effect about COVID. What could be also a sort of resilience that we can use the COVID to change things? Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Chancellor. So, 3 reflections. First, of course, antecedent formations very, very powerfully acted as either an accelerant or decelerant of the subsequent concerns over health and mental health processes. The data tend to suggest that it is the children who already face the most severe undertows in their daily lives that were most negatively adverse by, and were most threatened to drown by the pandemic. So we don't start with an tabula rasa, with an equal playing field. We start with extraordinarily different realities for children and youth around the world. Second, I think that there is some data that suggests, including the study released by the synthesis released by the U.S. Surgeon General, that in some domains, again, there are individual and their family and their cultural differences. Antecedent conditions tended to, for example, favor more family unity, more family solidarity, more family connectivity in some contexts. And we need to understand and we need to study those. The trajectories, however, are immensely varied as a function of local culture, local knowledge, structures, and the antecedent conditions that families found themselves in prior to the pandemic. But questions of solidarity, questions of the scaffolding of children and youth we have identified in the current literature. Unfortunately, I believe that these tend to be outliers. Tolstoy stars Anna Karenina with the most beautiful line, maybe in literature. All families are happy the same way, but each family is unhappy in its own way. And I think this is profoundly true of COVID-19, that the way it visited unhappiness around the world depended on local culture, local structures, local processes, local knowledge.
Please.
I want to thank the Chancellor for that very powerful and disturbing speech. I wanted to pick up on one of the issues which I find to be incredibly disturbing, the whole issue around mental health and psychosocial support or no support for children. And the fact that there are rising and continuously rising inequalities. And we know, as you have noted, that it's the families and the children who live in the most remote areas and the children who are the most excluded, who are facing the biggest difficulties also in the context of the pandemic. When we're talking about the family and the institutions of society, and primarily the schools, of course, playing a very, very important role in supporting children in terms of their mental health and with psychosocial support, we also know that these are the institutions which are even more at risk after the pandemic than before. So can you offer some further thoughts in terms of what literature and research proves to us that we need to do to support schools and families and the institutions of society to support children in terms of their mental health? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish to join colleagues to congratulate and thank Professor Suárez-Orozco for this inspiring, comprehensive presentation. And I see a couple of points which can be developed maybe during the discussion also in this workshop, which is the very first, I suppose, here at Casina Pio, about the huge impact of the pandemic after the last we had a few days before the world changed because of the pandemic. So let me say that it's really a little bit emotional for me to be here with all of you today. And I think this comprehensive presentation actually says us that education has been really one of the main sectors to be affected by this long-term shock. However, and it will be a big part of the solution, hopefully. However, you mentioned so many different dimensions to be taken into account that brings me to the point we have now. It's a challenge and a tremendous opportunity at the same time. That means education should be prioritized at the very core of the political agenda in the coming months and years. And it's not been the case so far. So this is the very first time that the entire world understood the importance of schools to be open, that the entire world understood the importance of children having the opportunity to socialize in their own peer relationships. And it's the very first time that globally we realize that schools are not simply a place, and crucially, a place to learn, but very much more. And this is what you actually demonstrated, looking at the negative impact of not having schools open and everything. So I want to say that we are very much trying to keep this momentum this year, because the risk I see is that as soon as the media coverage of this topic, we can also see now, because another huge dramatic crisis is coming out in the world, and it makes sense to move to that topic. I don't know, I'm not sure to what extent political leaders will keep seriously the emergency we still have, will keep seriously the importance to have education at the very core of recovery plans, of stimulus packages, and it's not the case so far. I will mention later in my presentation some data on that. So I think that one of the maybe purposes of this collective efforts we are doing is to keep the momentum in the coming months, and there will be some in the roadmap, some opportunities in a very intersectoral approach, not only between educators, teachers, and experts of education. And this is one of the main added value, maybe the positive side of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Could I respond very quickly to, or maybe we'll take all the questions first? I have a very brief answer, Senator Giannini, to your reflection, because here we have an empirical case. It is Sartre, paraphrasing Voltaire, and I will paraphrase Voltaire and Sartre, we can say that if we didn't have schools, we would have to invent them. And I think that this is what the world finally came to see. Just what a significant social institution is the school in society today. And whereas I think Voltaire reflected on something that could not be proven one way or the other, now we have a very, very significant case where we can say that we need to reinvent the schools as an institution of society. And of course, the foundational philosophical work on this flows from the great John Dewey, who saw very significantly the nature of the relationship between the promise of the practice of democratic citizenship as it unfolded in the social life in schools. Dewey famously said, schools are not a preparation for life. Schools are life. And Ms. Olson, so there's an enormous amount of work. You know, I think it was Anna Freud who worked with the children that were faced the savage London firebombings. And her insight is a profound insight. What Anna Freud learned from the schools for the children that had been displaced by the bombings was that what the children needed was a home in the profound sense of what a home means. That's why I started my reflections with schools are a home away from home. It's an enormous amount of literature on deeply traumatized children and what it takes to recreate the fabric. And it is a social process.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Marcelo, for pointing out this synchrony of harm that we're facing in COVID. I want to mention two things. One, it is my deepest hope that the scholars, politicians, and activists here today will spend a great deal of time focusing on what we have already learned about inequalities. Many of us have spent our lives attempting to reverse economic inequality, sex inequality, and race ethnic inequality. Some of these attempts have been successful and remarkable and important, and sadly, many have not worked. As has already been said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to look. This is an opportunity to look very, very closely at the struggles of people on our planet to reverse economic, race, and sex inequality. We can't take care of children unless their mothers don't starve to death. That's out of the question. We can't advance children's education unless their mothers have been trained to do a job and can bring in a sustainable income that doesn't require them or their children to be trafficked into prostitution. So these inequalities are linked, have been linked for a long, long time, and the tiny bit of hope I see sometimes in COVID is that it jumpstarts the urgency of addressing inequalities all over the pandemic, all over the globe, caused by the pandemic. Second brief comment I would make is I was reading an astrophysicist the other day, and I got a strange feeling of hope from this comment. We need to stop thinking we're the most special creatures on the planet, talking about humans. And in a way, yes, we have religion, yes, we have the church, but we also need to understand that in profound ways, we are not more special than a tree, an insect in the ground, because if we don't protect them as much as we're taking care of children and families, we're not going to survive. So there's this paradoxical challenge of COVID and environmental destruction at this point in history that requires us to see our place on the planet as not so special as we've always thought. Thank you.
You want to say something?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that comment. Melissa, we've seen the path of two giants, Paul Farmer and E.O. Wilson, on biophilia. So thank you for your reflections.